Hi, I'm Ed Baldoni, owner of Concrete Countertop Solutions. In this video, you'll see all the steps and techniques involved in forming your own concrete countertops using the Z Counterform Double Fancy Edge in our new Z Liqui-Crete mix system. A certified concrete finisher will take you through the steps of pouring while I show you how to prep, stain, and seal the countertops. At Concrete Countertop Solutions, we appreciate all of your support and are dedicated to helping our customers achieve the best results from our products. Enjoy the video. One of the most frequently asked questions we get is, can these tops ever be removed? If we screw the Durarock down to the cabinet, the answer is probably no. They're going to be hard to be removed. They can be removed. You'd have to smash all the concrete off them. So what you can do to solve that problem is don't screw the Durarock down to the cabinet. We're going to attach the Durarock simply with some silicone. We'll put some silicone on the edges of the cabinets. It just takes a little bit to hold it in place, because once the weight of the concrete is on here, it's going to be enough to hold these tops in place. Typically, it's the way granite is done. Granite is just held on with silicone. This is an Edge Expert. They come in both inside and outside corners. They will hold all 7 standard profiles firmly in place while cutting on a miter saw. As you can see, they are glued and splined together. There are no nails or screws that are going to get in the way when you're cutting. Here you can see how it holds the edge firmly in place while cutting with the miter saw. All 7 models of our forms will fit in the Edge Expert except the commercial form. The commercial form will not fit in the Edge Expert. As you can see, we made a perfect 45-degree cut. Good cuts mean good results. We're using the double edge profile in this kitchen, which is actually the hardest edge to use. It's the most decorative, but definitely the hardest one to finish. As you can see, we already have the profile pieces already cut. They're mitered, 45-degree angle to make this corner. And you can see we have the holes drilled in them. So our 5/8" screw will fit through the form and into the Durarock without stripping the Durarock. What we'll do is we'll kind of bump them together. You'll see they fit nice because they were already cut. And we'll just carefully put the screw in. Just snug it in. That's it, because we're only holding in Durarock and it doesn't have a whole lot of holding power. Later we'll duct tape these corners together to keep them nice and tight. The way to create a stove opening, it's very simple. What we don't want to do is see cement board or Durarock from anywhere once the forms are removed. So what we did is we kept the cement board back a 1/2 inch on top of the cabinet here. And we also cut the form back a 1/2 inch from the front. If you notice, the front is a 1/2 inch longer than the top of the form. And that's so when we use our piece of lumber for the side form, just a piece of plywood, you could use a piece of 1x4, whatever you have, and this form is removed, you're not going to see the Durarock from the edge when the stove is not in place, because we don't want to see cement board or Durarock from anywhere. The back wall form has already been pre-cut, and you can see we took a notch out of it right there, and the reason for that is so it'll slide up even with the top of the form, and the notch is not running into the front of the profile form. You'll see we also took a little notch out of the back of the back wall form right there. Again, so when this piece of lumber is removed, we're not going to see any from the side, we're not going to see any Durarock. I'm going to now attach our piece of plywood. Again, you could use a piece of plywood, you could use a piece of 1x4. It's basically a form for the side of your stove cutout here. And simply just keep it even with the back wall form and the front profile form, and put a screw into the side of your cabinet. That's all it takes. One screw in the front, one in the back. When you remove these screws, you'll never see anything. You could see we formed a pocket right here where the concrete is going to go on top of the cabinet, so when this form is removed, you won't see the edge of this Durarock, or you won't see the edge of the forms right here. Coming over to the corner here, people often ask how our inside corner is done, and they're simply just mitered at a 45 degree. You want to get a nice tight fit, and what happens is once the concrete goes inside of the form, they're actually going to push it together and make it tighter. So as long as you have a nice clean cut, you're going to get a nice result. We also have right here a splice. This run was over 8 feet long, so we had to splice it. There are two ways you can do it. You could simply just square cut them, but my carpenter here, being the great carpenter he is, insisted on 45 in it, and you could see, you can hardly even see that there's a joint in there. It's a perfect cut. From the inside, if you feel it, you don't even feel a line. The hardest part by far is forming this one small return next to the refrigerator. You could see we 45 degree cut the front wall form back, and then we cut a small piece of form that will simply attach in here with a piece of duct tape. We could have easily just square cut this and had a square cut there, but we kind of like to have the more decorative edge and bring it right around. Definitely a more professional job. One thing to keep in mind, make sure that your refrigerator or freezer will always open fully without hitting that return, because they're always going to be closed. When preparing the sink form, it's a good idea to put some painter's tape on the front of the sink form. That way when you caulk it and you remove the tape, you're not going to have any caulking smudged up on the front of your sink form. Now when we remove our tape, you'll see our sink form is perfectly clean. You can see we have a perfect bead on there now, and nothing is smudged on the sink form. Another good idea is to put a piece of styrofoam inside of your sink, tape it onto the top of your sink form, so when you're pouring your concrete and some concrete falls down inside of it, you're not ruining your sink. You'll see that we already had our hole cut in the Durarock for the sink. The sink is in. Basically our sink is ready to go now. You see the sink form is all in. This will be the same height. If you run a straight edge from the front to the back, everything will line up. Our knockouts are already in place. We have one for the faucet, one for our soap dispenser. Pretty much ready to go with the sink. What I'm going to show you now is our Liqui-Crete system using our Liqui-Crete admix, which is added to a 60-pound bag of a sand mix, whether you're using Sackcrete, Quickcrete, as long as it's a standard 60-pound bag of sand mix, along with our Z Clips and our alkali-resistant fiberglass mesh. Using this fiberglass mesh for reinforcing, you don't have to use wire mesh. Makes it way easier. Could be just cut with a pair of household shears. The problem with the fiberglass mesh is holding it at the right level in the concrete. Typically when you pour concrete, it's either you're pushing it down, it's sticking up, it's just never in the right place. And if it's not in the right place in the concrete, it's not going to do its job. So what we came up with our patented Z clip. It's a two-part clip that can be used either for our standard forms or for our 3.5-inch commercial form. To use it for our standard forms, simply snap off the longer legs. You're going to clip it onto the mesh, and you'll see it will lock in place. You'll then screw it down to the Durarock with a number 10 by 5/8 inch screw. That'll hold the mesh in the right place through your pour. We'll pre-break off a bunch of these clips, get the long legs broken off. Again, the long legs are used for our commercial form. Actually, with the long legs in place and the short legs in place, if you want, you could actually put 2 layers of mesh in one top. As you can see, the fiberglass mesh is really easy to install. Pretty much roll it out, get it to length, cut it off with a pair of, you could use actually household scissors in here to cut it. I'm going to flip the mesh over now, basically to keep it from curling up. It'll stay down this way. All right, next we're going to hook the Z clips just on one row here. We're going to attach them to the first row, approximately a foot apart. I'd say 12 to 10 inches apart. You'll see the Z clips actually will clip into the mesh and they'll stay on there. Like I said, probably go about every 10 to 12 inches with the clips. When working with fiberglass mesh, you definitely want to wear gloves because it gets very picky. It is basically strands of glass in here. The first row of clips is going to be screwed down on top of the Z form. It's very helpful to have a magnetic screwdriver. So you could just put your screw in. And you could screw right through the form. You don't even have to pre-drill this. You just have to put a little bit of pressure on it. Now that we have the one side attached, it's easiest to just fold it back and start clipping the clips on about every foot. And again, you want to keep them pretty much in the same line that they were in. You can see because the clips clip in and they basically stay right in place, it's fairly fast going. Now that we have a grid set up, we're going to put one in the middle of each square. And these don't have to be perfect, but it's nice to keep them in the same line. Once you have all your Z clips attached, just lay it down and simply start putting your screws in. Again, we're holding the clips down with a number 10 by 5/8 inch screw. And keep in mind, you are only screwing into Durarock here, so it's easy does it. The Z clips are now in place, the mesh is in place. You could see everything is nice and tight. When these Z clips were designed, they were designed to keep the mesh at the optimal height for our forming system. When this mesh is kept at the optimal height, it really prevents cracks from telegraphing through the top of the counter. It's a glass mesh, it's alkali resistant, it's basically the perfect material for countertops. Our clips and mesh were specifically designed to be used with our fiber reinforced Liqui-Crete system. Liqui-Crete in conjunction with a 60-pound bag of sand mix makes a highly flowable mix which will flow right through this mesh, creating a very, very strong crack-resistant top.
Good morning. I'm Leo Zini from Zini Concrete, and I'm an ACI certified concrete finisher. Today, we're here to show you the proper placement techniques used when pouring your concrete countertops. We also like to show you some of the tools used and the differences between them. We have here a countertop screed, which we're going to show you. We're going to use this in a little bit when we do the countertops. It's a little shorter than the island screed. We use the island screed when doing something this big. Once the countertop is placed, we're going to let it set a little bit. And we're going to take our magnesium float. Now this is a float that's provided by Concrete Countertop Solutions. Now this is a sand cast magnesium float. It differs from a float that you would buy off the shelf in a hardware store. It doesn't have an epoxy coating on it. So this lends itself to the use that we're going to do today a lot better than something with an epoxy coating. This is sand cast and it's pre-broken in. And what I mean by that is it's got some round edges here. It looks like it was used more in a little bit. And what makes it better is you really want a broken in tool when you're doing this kind of work. It doesn't leave any sharp edges or chatter marks, as we call them. It just does a nice smooth job when you're floating. It takes out any high spots, and it also will bring the water in the concrete to the surface. And that's what you want to use magnesium for. After we float it off, we're going to let it set a little bit. And then when we feel it's ready, we'll use the steel trowel. And the steel trowel, it'll allow us to flatten it out and polish it to a hard finish. And you'll see the difference between the two of them in just a little bit. The steel trowel will polish the surface and give you the look that you're looking for. Nice and flat. We could almost make it look like glass with this trowel when used properly. We're ready to pour. As you can see, this mix flows very nicely into and through the reinforcing mesh. We're going to try to get it all out here. You may want to have a pair of gloves handy in your toolbox. And what we want to do is get this mix right into the edges. You can see how it flows. This is a very nice, friendly mix to work with. It doesn't have any gravel in it or aggregates to cause any, what we call, well, they're air pockets when you take those forms off. So we're going to work it around here with the float. And then we're going to take our countertop screed and basically level it off a few times. Go over to back and forth fashion, and we'll get a nice flat finish. Once you get this section done, we're gonna go over this a couple times. We're gonna go over it at a 45 this way, a 45 this way, and then we're gonna flatten it out one more time this way. Right now, we've got to pour another section. You can see how it flows right through that reinforcing mesh beautifully. Sometimes it's handy to have a margin trowel with you, and basically a tool like this to help you clean out the buckets. Helps you clean your tools as well. Let's go. This is a real friendly mix to work with, as you can see. Now this is a little bit low up here, so I'm gonna spread a little bit more up in this corner, because we want to get it right to the top of the forms. At this point, we need to vibrate the forms a little bit to get rid of all the air pockets or any air that may be trapped in there. So we're just going to take our margin trowel and tap it. Don't be afraid to tap it, but this is going to get rid of any air pockets that you may see. You see the air pockets popping up here in the surface? Right there. You don't want to see those on the outer surface when you take this form off. So we're going to tap it. Good. And we're going to do a section at a time. Maybe we're going to come out here 2 feet. And remember where you left off. You could actually mark it if you want, but something like that. So we did 2 feet here. We did this side. Now we're going to come down 2 feet down this side. That should pretty much get rid of all those air pockets. Now we want to take our screed and continue the process, moving all this concrete along, placing it in the forms as level as we can possibly get it. There's a 45-degree angle this way. Pull it right off. Don't be afraid to pull it right off. 45-degree angle this way. Make sure that the screed touches both sides of the forms at all times when screeding. Now we'll come across it straight. Now if you have some areas that are a little bit low, as you can see right here, you're going to want to fill them in a little bit. Just pick up a little bit of the mix and splash it in there along the edge. It takes a little bit of fine tuning, but I'm sure that everyone can get this. And we have a little bit of time to work with this, so as we're placing it, we'll come back and do some more fine tuning. And we're ready for some more. Very flowable mix. You can't really see the acrylic fibers, the reinforcement that's in there, but the mix is reinforced with acrylic fibers. Kind of like baking a cake. Got some more in there? That's probably plenty. Just hang on, hang loose. You want to be careful that you don't put too much in there, or you'll actually have to, you may have to take some out, which is very common. Which may be what we did here. Okay, we got a little bit too much in the mix, or in the countertop, so we're going to take some out. Now we have to go back along the edge. We vibrated the first 2 feet, don't forget, so we're going to start back there where we left off, and we're going to vibrate and tap them, maybe another 2 feet. So you kind of just eyeball 2 feet along the edge. Remember where you left off. We're going to do the other side. Get all those air bubbles away from the edge, from your finish edge. And now we're going to go back and we're going to fine tune the edges anywhere where it may be low and you need some additional mix to fill in. To bring it up even with the top. Keeping the screed touching on that side of the form, the top of that form, and this form. And as you can see, it's nice and flat in the middle. We need a little bit more over here. A little bit right here. See a little in this corner. The edges seem to want to pull away a little bit, so sometimes you may have to just flatten them out with a margin trowel, or and sometimes it's a good idea to not start the screed right on the edge. Take it 2 or 3 inches away from the edge. Once you get the edge where you need it, once you get the edge nice and right up to the top of the forms, don't take the screed all the way to the edge and pull it again. Start about 4 inches in. And it won't pull it away from the edges. And you could take as much as you need and continue the process. And don't forget now, we have to do the edges. It's real important to keep those edges vibrated so you don't end up with air pockets. And you want to do it, you want to do the vibrating before you screed it. So we came about 4 feet here. We have a little bit more to go. Make sure the corners, you get the corners good as well, so that the mix goes right down in every nook and cranny that it has to be. That's that side. And we'll do this edge. And a little bit up on this other edge. Got a little bit of mix on the outside of the form here. Our edges should be vibrated very well right now. back now. We're going to finish screeding. It's a good idea to make sure that your floors and cabinets are properly protected with plastic, and what we used here is we taped rosin paper to the floor. So if you do have a spill, it's not going to damage anything. We're just working this right off into the pail with the screed. We're basically finishing the pour right now. We'll just clean this up a little bit. Didn't spill too much on the floor. And it's a good idea to keep a pail with a little bit in it for going back and filling in as you need it. We're going to check the countertop now, the concrete, and see if it's ready to float off. And if you can touch it and just leave a fingerprint without sinking in too much, it may be ready to float off. So we'll take our magnesium float. We may be a little early here, but it's better early than too late. And we're just going to kind of want to smooth it all off, fill in the low spots, and flatten it out. So we're going to flatten it out with the float. As you can see, we have a little spot right there that needs to be gone over and filled in. And the steel trowel will fill some of those parts in. But the float is your first step in getting the surface flat and level. This is basically how the magnesium float will leave the finish. It gets it nice and smooth, but it's not completely finished. As you can see, it glides across the concrete very easily. That's floated off. And we're going to let this set now for a little bit until it's ready to finish. It's going to have to get a little harder, actually pretty hard, before we're ready for the steel trowel. But that's how it should look when you're finished floating with the magnesium float. Our countertop mix is now set where we're going to apply the steel trowel finish. And as you can see, I'm touching it and it's barely leaving a fingerprint. And that's where it needs to be when you're ready to steel trowel it. Now, if you're doing a large area, you wouldn't want to wait this long to finish it. You'd probably want to get on it a little bit early. But you can see the surface, how the surface was floated off and how the float left it. Now you'll see how the steel trowel will flatten it out even more. You'll want to take some half-round strokes. And if you notice, I'm keeping the trowel about 1/4 inch off of the surface. so that it doesn't drag or it doesn't chip up the concrete that's there. You never want to you want to make sure that it's always a little bit, 1/4 inch to even a 1/2 inch. The harder it gets, the more you'll pick it up. But 1/4 inch right now is good. It gives you a nice flat surface, as you can see. And I'm applying a little bit of pressure to this trowel. It's not just gliding across the surface, I'm applying some pressure to it. And when I go off the edge, if you notice, I'm not stopping here and dragging concrete back. I'm going right off the edge. That's how you want to finish your edges. You don't want to pull back any of that concrete and leave a void along the edge. And when using the steel trowel, you can stay away from the edge just like we did with the float. You don't have to go on top of the form. Get as close to the edge as you can and apply pressure to the trowel as needed. For instance, you may want to put a little pressure to the front of the trowel here to get along the edge. We'll go right along the edge. And off. We're going to let this set a little bit more. And we'll get it even more polished. We'll get an even more polished finish when it sets a little bit more. So that's your initial finish. And we're going to let it set and come back to it maybe 10 minutes. You'll notice that there's some concrete on the top edge of this form, and that's nothing to worry about right now because you're going to want to sand that off with a gem pad before you strip the forms. So don't worry about any of that mess that's made on top of the form. But we're almost finished here. When you hear this noise, you know the concrete is ready for final finishing. That noise right there. This is a very important thing to remember when you're at the last step. Make sure your trowel is off the surface at an angle so that it doesn't dig in to the concrete, because if it digs in now, it's going to be very difficult to repair. And I always like to keep a damp towel handy at this stage and keep the edges of my trowel nice and clean so there are no pieces of dried concrete to get under the trowel and possibly scratch the surface. You can hear that surface is dry because we are very near completion. once over, and this top is done.
All right, it's day 2, and today we're going to reveal our edge. If you remember yesterday when Leo was finishing the top, he got some excess concrete that came over the top of our profile form. Well, today what we're going to do is we're going to sand that off using the gem pad. The reason why we want to sand it off, if we leave that concrete hang over and try to peel this edge off, there's a possibility that that concrete could chip back onto the top. So we're just going to use our gem pad, which comes with 3 different grits. It's all diamond sandpaper. We have a 60 grit, a 150 grit, and a 300 grit. What's nice about these gem pads too, you can see they're very flexible and they stick on the sanding block. Today, to remove this excess concrete, we're going to start off with the 150 grit. That usually seems to work nice. You want to carefully sand off all this excess concrete that's on top of the edge profile here. And again, this is to prevent it from chipping backwards. Okay, you could see now that we have the top of the profile form fully exposed. You could see 100% of the top of that form. This is now ready to be removed. All right, with a putty knife, we're going to carefully separate the form from the concrete. You see it should come right away pretty easy. Then you want to loosen it up, get it started. See, okay, it came off. You could see we have a beautiful edge here. There's a few holes, which is common. It's almost impossible to get that filled 100%, but before we finish the top here, we're going to take some of our counter patch, fill those in, and lightly sand it, and this will be a perfect edge. Okay, I'm going to reveal this edge here. Nice edge. Few holes here that we'll fill with our counter patch and sand that, but you can see we have a beautiful profile on that. There we go. Beautiful. That's a nice edge. All right, once the edges are revealed, you see there's sharp corners there, obviously. So we put the 300 grit paper on, and we're just going to easily round these corners. You want to be very careful sanding these edges, and start with the 300 paper because usually that's good enough to get these just rounded a tiny bit. Just want to take that sharp edge off. Now you could see some of these little pinholes in here and the larger holes. A lot of people like that look. They want to leave those holes there. It's a real natural looking look. Personally, I like them filled. So before we finish this, I'm going to use some Z Counter patch. We're going to fill all these little pinholes to basically give it a perfect finish. We don't want any holes left in our finish. You can see the bottom of the form is like glass. It's perfectly smooth. But as you come up, there's more spots in the form that it's going to trap air. So it is common to have these little holes like that. The hardest form to use is the double fancy form because it does leave the most spots in the form, in the profile of the form that will trap air as the air is working its way up out of the concrete. If you're looking for an easier form to use and still get almost the same look, the fancy is much easier. It just doesn't have this second reveal in it. And all the other forms are very easy to use. You'll hardly get any air in them at all trapped. But again, this gives you probably the nicest look out of all our edges. All right, we're going to reveal our sink now. When we formed this sink, what we did was we used the inside of the box, and we cut the inside of the box to fit inside of our, you can see our form liner right here, and then we just put some wood shims in here to wedge this piece of styrofoam in. Not only does it hold the styrofoam in, but it keeps the sink form really nice. And you can see they're just wooden shims that we had wedged in here to keep the styrofoam tight. There we go. There's our sink, and you can see it's all nice and clean because we did put the styrofoam in so nothing would fall inside of the sink. Now here's our sink form. You can see it's taped to the inside of the sink. It's still on there. We'll make sure that there's no concrete hanging over the edge of that also before we peel it off. Again, using the gem pad with the 150 grit. All right, when we put this sink form on, we always like to put the joint in the form facing us. So it will leave a little line there, which will be sanded out, but we always put that line to the inside. See, taking the form off. All right. If you remember when we put the sink form on, we had that bead of caulking that we put on the bottom of the sink form and the top of the sink. That's, you can see it, it's right here. We're now going to take that caulking out. You always want to make sure that you use silicone caulking. We have a little hook tool here. You get this part now. If any voids did occur in the edge, a slurry mix could be made using our Z Counter Pack. It should be applied by hand, sponged off, and then sanded smooth using either a gem pad or a Z grit disc. Five days have gone by since Leo finished this top, and you could see that he got a really smooth finish on this. This could actually be stained and finished just the way it is. However, we want to expose just a little bit of the sand that's in this concrete mix, and we're going to do that by using the Z grit discs. We're going to start off with an 80 grit, then we're going to bring it up to a 120 and a 220. All they are is it's a Velcro attached to our sander. You can see that the sandpaper just sticks on, it's Velcro. It's an 8-hole pattern, which fits to probably 90% of the orbital sanders on the market. We're hooking the sander to our shop vac. This is a really efficient way of sanding a top. You're not going to be able to polish aggregate with this system, but you will be able to expose a little bit of the sand that gives it a really nice finish. Plus, we're going to open up the surface of the concrete so it'll take our stain better. You can see the edges here. We already have pre-filled. We filled those a little earlier today. We filled them with our counter patch and sanded them down. So the edges are basically ready to go. We just have to get the top sanded. All right, we're going to start off with the 80 grit. I'm going to turn on the sander. We're going to have it hooked to our shop vac. We're going to turn on the shop vac also. As you can see, there's virtually no dust using this system. You could work in your kitchen and pretty much keep the rest of your house clean. Okay, this is right where I want it to be. I exposed just a little bit of the sand. I went through all three pads, the 80, the 120, and the 220, and we're ready to wash it down and get staining. We're going to wash it with just clean water and let it dry a little bit, and we're ready to stain. Just using a bucket of warm water, cool, doesn't matter, with a rag, towel. And we'll wash it down to make sure we get all that loose dust off it. You want to make sure before you stain that it's washed down nice, you don't feel any loose dust on the surface, and everything is nice and hard. We worked with a decorator and she gave us a color of what she wanted us to match. So in this countertop here, we're using a combination of wheat, amber, and garden. It's always important to do a little mock-up of what you're doing for your countertop. You don't want to just get a great concrete job and you go to stain it and then you hate the color. So we always suggest do a little 2 foot by 2 foot mock-up, stain that, let your homeowner or designer look at it, and make sure the color is what they're looking for. All right, we're ready to stain. This is the most fun part of the whole project because you get to use your creativity. There are a lot of different ways to apply the stain. You could use rollers, brushes, sea sponges. You could use multiple ways. You could roll on one coat and then take a sea sponge and dab around with a second color. And we'll go through the process when we do this top here. You'll see basically one of the ways that you're able to do it. We're using the Z Aqua-Tint, and the color we came up with is 5 parts amber, 1 part wheat, and 5 parts water. The Aqua-Tint is water soluble, so you could dilute these colors and get lighter shades of any of our colors just by adding water to it. So we'll have our green is 1 part of garden and 5 parts of water. Because we sanded this to a 220 grit and this mix is so dense and hard, we're going to mist the entire top with water to open up the pores. That way it'll allow our stain to get absorbed better into the concrete. You really don't have to worry, just hit it all. Doesn't have to be soaked, just kind of dampened up. All right, now the fun starts. I think first I'm gonna start off with my brownish color and kind of create a line going through here. Whatever you feel like doing here, just do. Put a little brown over on this end. Some green. And you can see you don't have to have this applied like paint where it's one solid color. It looks a lot more natural. And you could blend your colors together, let one run into the other one. I'm going to use a roller here for this bigger section. We want the countertop mostly green with a little bit of the brownish gold running through it. When you're putting it on too, don't be afraid to leave some puddles in it because that'll create darker areas in the finish, which actually in the end looks a lot nicer. The Aqua-Tint is basically a water-based dye that gets absorbed into the concrete really nice. The first time you do this, you're probably going to be afraid that you're going to mess up, but you really can't mess up here. And you could always go back over it a second and a third and a fourth time and add more colors to give it the look you're looking for. Again, the designer in this particular job was looking for more of a green tone, but with a little bit of that golden brown accent in it. So that's why our basic top is going to appear green. Now you can see when you put it on and you leave it like this, you let that soak in, you'll have a darker vein going through here of the green, which will really look nice when it starts to dry and you put your sealer over it, because the sealer will bring out these colors. And depending on what kind of sealer you use, if we were to put an epoxy sealer on this, it would darken this up immensely. I mean, it would almost turn this green to a very, very dark green. The epoxy finishes really darken your tones that you're working with, where if you used our Cyacryl 14, it's more of a natural finish, or if you use the water-based Aqua-Poxy, that's the same thing. It's a very natural finish. It doesn't affect the color very much at all. All these bubbles you see here, don't worry about that. They'll actually soak in and they'll give it a nice effect once these start to soak in and dry. I kind of actually like the effect that creates. Now if you want it this darker, you have to remember we have this diluted almost 5 parts water to 1 part of our stain. So it will appear fairly light, but again, that's the look we're trying to get here. A little bit of brown, you can put some splashes in. Kind of looks, give it that little granity type look. I'm going to take a sea sponge and blend that in a little. You can see how the colors are starting to come together and give it a really neat effect. Over here where I left that green on heavier, we have like a darker green vein going through here. If you ever looked at a rock, kind of the effect we're looking for here, it's not a bad idea if you go take some pictures or look at some pictures of granite and you see the way the veins naturally run through the stone and try to mimic that. I think what we're gonna turn out here is gonna be really nice. I'm gonna let this dry a little and see how it looks, and probably come and apply a little more stain, add a little more color to it once I see how it sets up. About a half an hour went by since we applied our stain. You can see it's pretty much dry. We got the effect that we were looking for. Now what we're going to do is wash it down with the towel and just clean water to get any residue off before we apply our sealer, because we don't want the sealer sticking to the residue. We want the sealer sticking to the concrete. You're going to see when we start to wash this down, some of the color will come off and we'll blend in these colors also a little nicer. The color that you're seeing now when we wet this is kind of how it's going to look when we put our sealer on top of it. It will bring up the colors a little more like you're seeing now. You can see we took off some stain. It also blends it in a little nicer, gives it more natural look. Now keep in mind, if you have any spots that are too light, you could go back over and add more stain to it. You could even put a third and fourth color on top of this if you want. You can see the color that is coming off. That's basically what did not get absorbed into the top. That's just laying on top of the concrete surface. So we want to remove all that. Now there's also another trick. If you do have a spot that is too dark and you're not 100% happy with it, you could take some light sandpaper, a 220 or even a 300, and sand it down a little. You could apply more stain over it. So the system is very forgiving. All right, we're going to let this dry, come back tomorrow, we're going to put our sealer on it. Today we're going to apply our sealer. We gave the countertop 24 hours to dry since we put our stain on. We're using the Z Aqua-Poxy, which is a water-based epoxy system. Some of the tools needed. You're going to use a roller with a high-quality roller pad. These are velour roller pads. They're actually from Sherwin-Williams. They're one of the really nice pads that we found. They're very soft, very short. They're about 3/16 of an inch, I believe. You want to use a real short roller pad cover when you're using the epoxies. And also make sure that they are epoxy compatible. We're using a paintbrush to do the edges with. And you definitely want a measuring cup to mix the epoxy with. We're going to mix the Aqua-Poxy now, and you want to make sure you have a measuring cup that has marks on it so you know that you are measuring correctly. The Aqua-Poxy is mixed 1-to-1. It's pretty important that you follow the directions with anything that you're mixing like this and mix properly. This is a 1-to-1 mixture. Kind of milky looking. Mix it up, and it's ready to go. I'm going to attach the roller cover. You want to make sure that it always spins freely. You don't want to get any of these products on your hands. It's pretty hard to remove if you do. Now with a tack rag, I'm going to go over the top of the counter in case there's any dust left. You see, it's very milky, very easy product to apply. And you want to have a nice roller cover. You can see how smoothly this is going on. The milky look will go away, and it doesn't take long at all, probably in 15 minutes. You could see already it's starting to go away. Okay, once we have it on in the one direction, we'll simply roll over it in the other direction without putting any more material on. Now with the paintbrush, we'll do our edges. You want to get a nice even coverage here, but keep in mind we are going to be putting another 2 more coats on, so if you don't have a perfect coverage, it'll still be okay. Our first coat of Aqua-Poxy is dried sufficiently where we could sand it before we put the second coat on. I like to use the 320 grit paper, and just by hand, I don't put it on the sander at this point because we'll take too much material off. So basically take the pad, bend it in half, and lightly sand the top. This gets any dust particles or imperfections off the top before you put your second coat on. I like to put 3 coats on, and before I do the final coat, I'll go up to the 400 grit and sand it with the 400 before my final coat. With a clean cloth, we'll wipe the dust off. And then use our tack cloth to pick up any fine particles that are still left. And now basically we're ready to put our second coat of sealer on. This will go on the same exact way the first coat did. You're going to be applying a thin coat. You can see this goes a really long way. You don't want to oversaturate the roller. Basically, it's a few thin coats are better than 1 thick coat. And you'll see when it starts to dry, it kind of levels itself out. Once this second coat is finished, we'll wait till it dries, and we'll use the 400 grit sandpaper, sand that, and apply 1 last coat in the same fashion that we applied the first and second coat. And you'll have a very well sealed countertop. The third coat of Aqua-Poxy has been applied to these countertops. The countertops are now finished. If you have any questions, you can contact us on our website. Have a nice day.